Today, I want to talk about the women who went with the Mormon Battalion and the soldiers and families who were left on the open prairie, homeless refugees of religious persecution, and the story of the money sent back to the families left behind. Usually, you have to have a federal or a religious unit, but the battalion was both. A presidential order created the Mormon Battalion as a national volunteer unit. It is still the only military unit in U.S. history where almost all of the members came from just one denomination. So who were these Mormon people who were being asked to volunteer when so many others had been turned away? Thomas Kane describes them at the recruitment ball. He said, "If anything told that the Mormons had been bred to other lives, it was the appearance of the women. Although their ears were pierced and bore the loop marks of rejected penance, the women were without earrings, finger rings, chains, or brooches. Except such ornaments, however, they lacked nothing most becoming the decorous maiden." Okay. This isn't advancing it. Can you do the next? The light on this is gone, so I wonder if it's out of battery. Okay, there are 20 laundresses, which is standard for a battalion. There were a dozen plus extra women for a total of about 36 women and 44 children. This is not normal. I want to talk, slide, about the women in groups. Group 1. There were 5 women who left Santa Fe, slide, with the battalion and continued to California. Melissa Correa said, I will talk about the new information about 2 of the 5. Melissa Correa said, one of the hardest things about the journey was the starting. Okay, we need the next slide. I had to leave my father and mother. I thought my duty required me to keep with my husband. I never saw my parents again. Slide. Melissa was the matron of the military hospital in San Diego. This is a newly located pay voucher showing her military pay of $12. She is the only woman in the battalion who received any pay for her efforts from the government. Slide. Laundresses were paid by the men they served. The 5th woman has been thought to be Sophia Gribble or Sophia Tubbs. Some books put her in the Willis Detachment, listing her as, slide, Sophia Tubbs. This is an error. The reason Sophia is not our 5th woman, first, at the time she was married to Gribble, not Tubbs. There are no women mentioned as being in the Willis Detachment in any journals, and both Tubbs and Gribble are privates. Now, why does that matter? Melissa Correa told us there were 5 women, Cook stated, at the earnest request of 2 captains and 3 sergeants, their wives were permitted to accompany the expedition. That kind of ruled out Tubbs or Gribble, but we still needed a 5th woman who had to be a wife of an officer. So who is our 5th woman? Mary Clark Steele Brown had been forgotten. In 1872, in Mary's obituary, it states she was one of 4 women, okay, so they got that wrong, who accompanied the command. 2 battalion men spoke at her funeral. They described her as firm and confident. This obituary was, slide, convincing that she was our 5th woman, but we still found a final clue. Isaiah, Mary's son, in his pension report, said that during Isaiah's reenlistment, a rawhide rope parted, one end of which flew back and struck him in the right eye and cut the eyeball from out the socket. He was then conveyed to the mother's home in San Diego, where he was attended. Mary has to be our fifth woman. Group 2, Higgins Detachment, left from the Arkansas River and escorted about 10 women and 33 children to Pueblo. The battalion arrived at the Arkansas River, the international border, where Abner Blackburn relates, "We were very much disappointed as we expected to see a large stream of water with steamboats running on it as they passed through a thickly timbered country. But instead, we were compelled to dig in the bed for water." Nelson Higgins is here charged by A.J. Smith to escort the women and children to Fort Pueblo. Bliss in his journal said, "Today the families who have been in the company so far left us for Fort Bent. A guard of 10 men were detailed to accompany them, furloughed 30 days, to join us at Santa Fe. Captain Higgins' detachment reached Fort Pueblo and helped to build 20 log structures." He and some of the other men then returned to Santa Fe to rejoin the battalion, which had already departed. Colonel Alexander Donovan, famous in Mormon history, countermanded Smith's order and told Captain Higgins to return to Fort Pueblo and use the supplies at Bent's Fort through the winter. Group 3, the Brown Santa Fe Detachment. On October 18th, the Santa Fe Detachment, totaling about 120 souls, left for Fort Pueblo with 20 days' rations, worn-out teams of oxen pulling wagons loaded with 27 ailing soldiers. One last detachment with no women had 8 individuals who were incapable of walking. Through a mistake in loading, they didn't have enough supplies to take them to Santa Fe. Upon arriving in Pueblo, Willis reported, "On the 2nd day of December, I arrived at Santa Fe in charge of a detachment and called upon Colonel Price," unquote. He was the Missouri Mormon hater, quote, "for winter quarters, but he utterly refused to give any assistance, even refusing quarters for the men that was unable to travel. But immediately he gave an order for me to proceed to this place," being Pueblo, "without delay." We now know, next slide, we now know exactly who was on the detachments. This is one of about 40 muster or pay rolls recently located at the National Archives. This one is taken after all 3 detachments are together under the leadership of James Brown. Slide. So with that background in mind, let's talk about Group 4, the women on the home front, or the women left behind by their husbands. Slide. My dad used to say, "If you want to know what happened, follow the money." Okay, let's examine how the pay worked. Mythbuster, there only was clothing money, as volunteers never got uniform money from the federal government. At Santa Fe, the men sent home what they could of their first 1.5 months' pay. Although the men were paid the same as other soldiers due to distance, that is all the families received. Slide. We are going to jump back in time to the 19th of June, 1846. At the direction of President Polk, a courier took a dispatch from Secretary of War Marcy to Colonel Kearney at Fort Leavenworth, who writes orders to James Allen, slide, who in turn goes to Mount Pisgah in central Iowa to recruit among the Mormon refugees. Slide. On the 26th of June, Captain Allen of the 1st Dragoons arrives at Mount Pisgah and distributes the circular which says, "I have come among you, instructed by Colonel S.W. Kearney of the U.S. Army to visit the Mormon camps and to accept the service of 4 to 5 companies to go to slide, Santa Fe, then to California. No one volunteered. On the 13th of July, a recruitment dance was held at the Bowery. Then on the 14th, the men started officially signing up. Thomas Kane arrived at Council Bluffs. This is sketched by him of the enlistment camp on the 14th. Slide. How did the men feel? Henry Wilcox writes, "We had a call from the president to go to Mexico. This came hard to me. After being drove from city to city and from land to land, and then for them to have the audacity to come out and call us after being obliged to leave Nauvoo in order to keep the peace and our families on the open prairie, to call on us to go to a land and go and fight for a land that has utterly rejected us. It was a hard case." On the 17th of July, 88 bishops were called to shepherd the men's families. They were cautioned to keep track of the women and the money and the teams. On July 18th, at 1 o'clock, a farewell dance was held at Sarpy's trading post. Brigham gave his advice to the officers at 6 p.m. that evening. Slide. On the 19th, most of the men are furloughed until the 21st, when the march began. Slide. On the 25th, 3 power of attorneys that have survived were signed to the committee for companies A, B, and C to cash the men's pay. This committee was Newell K. Whitney, Daniel Spencer, and Jonathan H. Hales. Their job was to oversee the finances and the supplies for the families. Slide. On August 1st, the men arrived at Fort Leavenworth, where they finally got tents. Slide. On the 4th of August, Adjutant Dykes says, "We shall draw tomorrow morning $42 per man due for clothing for the year of 1846, but the most of this," slide, "will be due Sarpy for the goods received." Henry Wilcox tells us he has to carry a knapsack of clothing, a blanket, a cup, a fork, a spoon, a plate, 2-quart canteen, dinner sack, and a musket, a cartridge box, a bayonet, a scabbard, 2 other straps, 1 to go on the musket. When I get all of this on, I'm worse fixed up than any horse, and I shall need no other breastwork to defend me. Slide. This clothing roll for Company C is the first accurate list we have of the battalion men, as the recruitment list has men who never went. Slide. On the 6th, John Taylor collected money at Fort Leavenworth for the families from the clothing money and made the following list. There were 5 lists like this, 1 per company. In his August 6th letter, Henry Wilcox says, "I have just received $40. I have let my family have $25 to help them off." Slide. On the 7th, Arnold Stevens wrote to his wife Lois, "I have bought you 20 yards of calico at 20 cents per yard, 1 pound of tea and 3 pair of shoes, 2 yards of jeans," unquote. Calico in St. Louis is about 5 cents per yard. In his letter, he goes on to say, I took up $10 at Sarpy's. I had but $32 coming to me, 25 of which I have sent back to you." Slide. On the 11th, Parley P. Pratt arrives at winter quarters with $5,860 from the men's clothing money. Slide. And letters which mention the money sent by other men. In Samuel Gully's letter, he reports that when he went to turn in his money, they had closed the books, so he sent it in a letter. Slide. George Taggart writes to Fanny, his wife, "I shall send you by the bearer of this letter $20 in money, which I think you must need by this time." Slide. Here is money noted in the committee records, which I found in the at the back of the Camp Creek record book. Note Fanny's signature accepting the money. In the Army of Israel, the author tells the story of Fanny Taggart as an example of how Brigham mistreated the women. When I locate things like this, I like to run them down to their source. I found in Fanny's autobiography, she reports, I immediately looked up Brigham. He told me to look for some of my acquaintances and get in with them until I could get a house for myself. Slide. My husband had written stating that some provision would be made for the families of the men. This had kept my hopes up on the way. The answer I received from Brigham made me feel like bursting into tears. To hide them, I quickly turned away. That's where the story fades out. She goes on to say, I walked a few steps and looked up to see a woman standing in the door of a tent. I wiped my eyes and asked if she could direct me to Brother Asa Davis. She showed me his house, and I was given accommodations such as they had. Slide. On the 13th of August, President Young desired the council to take into consideration the propriety of sending Bishop Newell K. Whitney to St. Louis for the purpose of laying in supplies for the camp, as there were many women in camp whose husbands in the Army had sent them money. They have them to take care of, and what they can save, we save to ourselves, for we would have to pay it out of our own pockets. If they lay their money here, they will pay 3 prices for what they get. That quote, as much as anything, convinced me that Brigham didn't intend to take their money. Okay. The next day, Brigham writes to the council. Among other things, he says, let everyone distinctly understand that the Mormon Battalion as organized from our camp is to allay the prejudice of the people and to prove our loyalty to the government of the United States. He goes on to report how much flour, sugar, and calico, etc. cost in winter quarters as opposed to the prices in St. Louis, Missouri. Here is a story problem for you. If Brigham had 11,000 people, and there are different estimates as to how many he had, but if he had 11,000 people in exile with a daily ration of 1 pound of flour for each, and upriver prices were $10 per 200-pound barrel for flour, as they were reported to be, that's $550 a day for flour alone. But the same 200-pound barrel of wheat in Missouri, the price is about 85 cents, or $46.75 for a daily ration for those people. By the 18th of August, the High Council sends a letter back to Brigham listing 57 families that are not willing to send their money to St. Louis, with a plea for Brigham to come and explain how the system will work for them. The records show that these families received about $1,000. The 9 in yellow do not show any money coming to them at all. Slide. On the 19th, Beulah Clark, Lorenzo Clark's wife, writes to President Brigham Young and council, I wish that you would send me $10. I should like for those that go to buy a cow to buy for me out of the $25 a good new milk cow, and the balance they can buy what they see fit. In a letter, Mariah Stevens, wife of Roswell Stevens, says, I desire to obey counsel. I intend to do so. I should be glad to have $10 sent to me, as I do not know how to get along without it until you could get up the goods. Signed, Mariah Stevens. P.S. My husband, Roswell Stevens, has sent $25. In my mind, this shows the independence of this woman. She doesn't want to take charity. In a report to the Council of the 12, learns from Brother Joseph Matthews that wheat has been bought for 18 to 25 cents per 60-pound bushel in Missouri. On the 20th, Brigham writes back to the council. In that letter, he says, we will send Bishop Whitney to make their purchases and send another man to Missouri to get wheat and have it brought to this place to have it floured. By this process, everyone could get as much and much more than they could to have it purchased here, and 1,000 things wanted which they otherwise could not get. That same day, in the meeting, a motion carried that there be a man appointed to go to Missouri and buy $1,000 worth of wheat. I figure at the 85 cents a 200-pound barrel, that would be about 118 ton of wheat. That is still only a month's ration for the refugees. Slide. On the 29th of August, in a letter to the battalion, we read, "Grinding grain to flour will give labor to the teams of the camp this winter in the manufacturing of flour, and in other words, that the money thus expended would be worth from 2 to 4 times as much to the church as it would expended in retail purchases, and no one individual would be injured, but would do them good. Others in the camp have made out their bills and added their funds to the money from the Army and are sending to St. Louis by Bishop Whitney." August 31st, the men are paid in Santa Fe. John D. Lee and Howard Egan have gone to accept the pay and bring the pay back. Slide. On September 7th, On September 7th, Mary Ann Compton, in a letter, writes, "The money is in the hands of the 12, and they are going to send it downriver. I have talked with Brigham. He says the articles can be bought there cheaper than I can have them brought here by myself. The church is generally sending in this way, and each one sent a bill of such articles as they want. At upriver prices, the $30 sent her would buy 2 barrels of flour, 15 yards of calico, and 3 pair of boots. At St. Louis and Missouri prices, she could afford most of the things on her list. 1 bolt of cotton fabric, 25 pounds of coffee, 5 pairs of shoes, 8 yards of blue drilling, 6 yards of Jane's, 12 yards of Lindsay, 4 barrels of flour, 1 cow, and 15 yards of calico for women's dresses. What made this story more important in my mind was this family needed everything, as they had been burned out of Illinois and had escaped with just the clothes on their back. From Santa Fe, on the 20th of September, Thomas Robbins writes to his wife, "I am well pleased with the course which you took in obeying counsel concerning the money which I sent to you. For I have all confidence in the bishops, and if you should let them lay out your money, they can get double what you could for it. And if you let them use the money and it don't reach your needs or wants, you can have some place to call on them again." The committee members, Jonathan Hales and Newell K. Whitney, accompanied by John Van Cott, were sent to St. Louis for supplies. On the 15th of November, the Council of the 12 sent a letter to C.C. Rich at Mount Pisgah, saying, "We have received Amity Johnson's letter, and you can say to her that when the goods arrive, her request will be attended to. The goods are expected in a week to 10 days. Sister P.L. Buell writes, "I am at winter quarters. We have plenty to eat. Winter quarters is a city of log huts, but we are comfortable." On the 29th of December, she writes, "Bishop Whitney went to St. Louis, or St. L., got groceries and etc., mostly for those that their husbands were gone in the Army." In a letter from Willard Richards to Thomas Kane on the 19th of February, so later in the winter, we read, "Now, sir, if the government is satisfied of our loyalty, let a discharge of the Pueblo detachment be ordered. Let the battalion at El Paso be returned to the same point and discharged in like manner," unquote. They had word that the battalion was wintering in El Paso. Quote, "And it will forward our immigration 100% the coming year, for we can raise grain in the Salt Lake Valley sufficient to say to all, 'Come on, bring yourselves, and we will feed you.'" Unfortunately, the bulk of the Mormon battalion has already been in California for 3 months, integrating and making friends. They dug wells, fired bricks, built a courthouse, and they built Fort Moore. In the early 20th century, there were a number of letters to the federal government that have survived that ask questions showing that historians did not think the battalion was treated fairly. My conclusion after this study is of the women who went with the battalion on the march to California, as well as those women who accompanied the detachments, I believe they were treated well by the military. The women who were left on the home front were provided for by the exiled saints. And all the records I have found show that the women did get their money from Brigham. How did the military treat the men of the Mormon battalion? They got the same benefits as other soldiers. One last slide, one last woman's story. Women's voices can be faint, but Sarah Allen left a wonderful autobiography. She says, "I married Ezra Heath Allen in 1837. In 1846, we began making preparations to remove west. My husband, in company with Joel Ricks, took a journey to St. Louis to assist Joel in bringing his stock to Nauvoo to prepare for the journey. And in return, he was to have assistance in removing his family. We crossed the Mississippi River on the 27th of April, 1846. The company was urged forward until we arrived at Mount Pisgah, where we remained for a length of time while the brethren put in grain for the immigration that was expected to follow. Then we again continued our journey until we arrived at Council Bluffs. We encamped near Mosquito Creek. There were some violin players, and my husband had been a fifer in the Nauvoo Legion. They endeavored to cheer the hearts of the saints, and with their music, a call was made for 500 of the brethren to enlist in the service of the United States and march to California. My husband enrolled, and I was left alone. A man and his wife asked the privilege of moving their wagon into my yard. He built me a house and divided his provisions with me and waited until I could, in a meager way, return their kindness. Meanwhile, I exerted myself in every way that I could to provide for my family. The Lord raised up friends in my hour of need. In the spring of 1848, I began to look forward to the return of my husband. The Lord had blessed my efforts to provide for my family, and the brethren and sisters had been kind to me, but a long journey lay before me, and I looked forward to the time when his strong arms would lift those burdens of care from my shoulders. At length, the news came that a company of brethren was expected. I felt anxious to go to the ferry and meet him, but circumstances would not permit. So I remained at home, waiting, watching, listening to the sound of every footstep that approached my door. Word was brought to me that some of the brethren had arrived home, and that my husband, with 2 others of the brethren, had been killed by Indians in the California mountains. I learned that a purse containing about $120 in gold dust had been found belonging to my husband, and it was being brought to me. Thus were my hopes and my expectations blasted in a moment. She later married Joel Ricks. They named their first child Ezra. I hope you have a feel for the story of the battalion and the women affected by it. Am I done with this study? No, not by a long shot. We search on this every day. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions. Does anybody like to offer a question?
No questions?
No questions?
You have it all in your mind? Oh, boy, did I do a good job.
You did both, I think both did a fantastic job. A lot of research and a lot of love.
Yes.
Tomorrow, I'll give a plug for my part of the program. I'm going to be talking about some of the battalion members who didn't go to Salt Lake to have their homes necessarily as members of the church, but joined or belonged already to other faiths. So if you want to hear more about the Mormon Battalion, feel free to come tomorrow afternoon to hear about that.
Okay, and I would like to invite you all to take one of the little medallions out there and a brochure. The brochures have been published in the last couple of days, and so they're brand new. And we would love for you to be able to go to our website and view the virtual trail or information about your families who were in the Mormon Battalion. And Daniel, some of us were researching on the Mormon Battalion men, and there are some of them that just kind of disappear and people didn't know what happened to them. And so through our early Sage group that we had working together on this, I had met Daniel, and he has done an amazing amount of research on all of the, well, for instance, the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now the Community of Christ, the Strangites, the Cutlerite group. So I thought, you know, maybe some of them went into those. And so he's been doing a study of that for the last year so that we can know what happened to all of these men. So.
And their kids.
And their children, their sisters, their, you know, who out of this group of families went that direction. And so that will be forthcoming and will be an interesting presentation. Although we have one here with Jill Crandall and Marianne Kirk tomorrow at the same time. Marianne's will highlight the Mormon Battalion as well, so you'll have to choose. Sorry. So, any more questions?
Anybody
Boy,
here
you're a quiet
got
group.
an ancestor that was on the battalion?
Okay, we've got
Shout
one
out,
here.
Shout out to your family. Okay, great.
So Roswell Stephen and Thorpe Peck, and you were Reddick Newton Allred and whoever? Who? John Cox.
Ah,
Okay.
now Amos was a Cutlerite.
Yeah, you know, we went and visited with the Cutlerites. My husband and I, we went and visited them a couple of times and figured out that the Cutlerites, all of the living Cutlerites, I think there are 6 of them left right now, are related to my husband. So it's a small world in the church, no matter what offshoot you went into.
Well, and as a member of the Community of Christ, when I was growing up, I used to swim in the very same river where the battles were fought in Los Angeles. And one of my favorite things was to go downtown and see the big waterfall monument right where the Fort Moore was built. And so I have fond memories of the history of the Mormon Battalion, and this website got so many new things that I had never seen before. So I recommend that website to you. Go to it and contribute by joining the Mormon Battalion Historical Group.
And he's not even a member yet.
I'm not a member yet. I will be.
But we are going to have, if you go to our website, there is a calendar about events. So we're having events along the trail this year. And so go there to keep updated. Our main event will be in San Diego in January, providing that, you know, it may turn into a virtual thing. We don't know yet with COVID. So come join us. We have meetings that have different speakers about various subjects interesting to the battalion. So, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.